Hello, everyone. I'm Jeanette.
And I'm Melissa. Welcome, listeners.
This is the Babies in Common show. So today is Sunday. Usually we don't do this on a Sunday, but here we are. It's April 11th, 2021. And today we're going to be talking with a longtime Babies in Common mom, Liz Sheehan Castro. She and her husband took my prenatal classes, and she used to come to my parents' group many, many years ago. But today we're going to be talking about Liz's professional life and about the legislative effort that's been launched to get childcare to be free in Massachusetts. Who would not want that?
Amen.
So Liz works for the SEIU Education and Support Fund, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization founded for the purpose of developing and managing worker-centered education, training, and professional development programs. According to their website, they work closely with the Service Employees International Union, which is what SEIU means, which is a labor union that represents nearly 2 million workers in healthcare, the public sector, and property services. She's worked for them since 2019 as the Massachusetts Program Director, and in her role, she supports 2,500 unionized home child care providers in Massachusetts with training, professional development, and advocacy. And oh my God, 2,500 people are unionized as childcare workers. Melissa, had you ever heard of unionized
No,
childcare?
I have never heard of that.
Me neither. It's like so
cool.
mind-blowing, all the things you're
That's exciting.
Yeah. So before this, Liz spent 10 years working on issues of food access with the Worcester County Food Bank and the Worcester Food Policy Council. She has a background in program management, policy advocacy in the fields of food justice, international development, youth development, and education. She graduated from Pitzer College in California and then moved to the opposite side of the world. Well, not quite the world, but the United States to go to SIT Graduate Institute in Vermont. She lives in Worcester with her family, where she's active with the public schools, local nonprofits, and community organizing efforts. But when not working, which is always the other side of our life, you may find her dancing in her kitchen, lifting weights in the basement, or going on an adventure with her family. So thank you for being with us today, Liz.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you both.
Awesome.
So let's start off with some basic information about today's topic. According to childcare.gov, childcare is one of the biggest items in a family's monthly budget. And that is no surprise to anybody who either has young children in daycare or is looking into it by pregnant. I always joke that, everybody's biggest fear in childbirth class, their number one fear is, what if I have the baby on the side of the road? And of course, most of the people that are taking childbirth class are having their first baby. So my joke is, you don't have to worry about having your baby on the side of the road. You have to worry about how you're going to pay for childcare because don't waste your anxiety on that. It is going to be highly unlikely that you are going to have the baby on the side of the road if it is your first baby coming out.
But if you do, you have to name your baby at least their middle name after your car.
Oh, see, I was thinking maybe the side of the road that you're on, but all right. Your car,
you could do that too, but the car's more fun, I think.
Very fun. Okay. So yeah, no surprise there. But at the same time, childcare providers, need to be paid more. I mean, they're taking care of the most precious things we have in our life. So there are already government programs to assist families with paying for childcare. Childcare subsidies, also called vouchers or fee assistance, is when each state receives funds from the federal government for a state-run childcare subsidy program. These programs help low-income families pay for childcare so they can work or attend school. Eligibility requirements are different in each state. Families who have low incomes or meet other requirements may be eligible for things like Head Start or Early Head Start. And there are state-funded pre-K programs for kids between 3 and 5 years old as well. Some states offer these programs to eligible families at low or no cost. There's also childcare fee assistance available to eligible members of the military. This program is managed by Childcare Aware of America. Eligibility requirements are different, again, for each branch of service. Then there are work and school-related programs. So there's assistance for high school students. Some states offer financial help for high school students who need childcare to finish school. What a wonderful program that is. That's super important. So see childcareaware.org to find contact information for your state childcare subsidy office. There's also college or university childcare. Some colleges and universities offer childcare on campus. These programs may offer special discounts to students, faculty, and staff, but as someone who used to be the partner of a graduate student, well, I'm still his partner, but he's not a graduate student anymore. They are often full and hard to get a spot in. So that's another dynamic. Employer assisted dependent care. Some employers may allow employees to put a portion of each paycheck into a special fund to use for childcare. The money placed in these funds is not taxed and can only be used to pay for childcare. Check with your human resources department about what might be available where you work if you're interested in that. And there are also other employer resources. Some companies offer childcare on site for employees' children. In addition, some childcare programs may offer discounts for employees of certain companies. So find out if your employer has relationships with any nearby childcare programs that offer employee discounts when you're doing your research into your childcare options.
So one of the questions that I had when I first learned what Liz is doing and what this legislation is, and we will get to this question, but as my little preamble here, is that, when people think about like free childcare, they're like, well, how are you going to pay for that? And I hope that right now, Melissa and I are establishing that there are already a lot of things that are paid, like a lot of programs that are already paying for this, whether it's the state, the federal government, or local employees and other options. So in addition to all the things Melissa just said, there's also local and provider specific assistance and discounts. So some childcare providers provide rates at a discount for some families called a sliding fee scale. And you can ask each provider about that if you want to find out if they offer that. Local nonprofit organizations and individual childcare providers could offer a fee assistance or scholarship. So you can ask them about that or look on childcareaware.org. Some childcare programs offer a discount to families that enroll siblings, which is really nice. And many providers offer discounts for military service members as well. There's also specific programs for Native Hawaiian, Native Alaskan, and American Indian families. And those you can find out about at childcare. ta.acf.hhs.gov. And there's also more than 150 Head Start and Early Head Start programs for American Indian, Alaskan Native children as well. And you can find those at the Head Start locator. You can look for that on the HHS website that I just gave you. And in Hawaii, if you're listening from Hawaii or plan to move there, there are also programs that assist with childcare and preschool for children who are Native Hawaiian or of Native Hawaiian ancestry, which is also amazing. And finally, let's not forget tax credits. So they reduce the amount of tax you owe and may result in a refund. But to claim the tax credits, you have to meet certain qualifications and file a return, even if you have no other filing requirements or owe no taxes. There's a child and dependent care tax credit and an earned income tax credit. So see the IRS website or your tax preparer for more information. So that was a large preamble, but that just kind of sets the tone, I think, for what we're about to talk about. So let's talk about more specific questions. So first of all, Liz, you approached me, you sent me an email and said, hey, this is what I'm working on now. Like, I'm curious if your listeners would be interested. And I was like, well, yes, this sounds amazing. So it's called the Common Start legislation, specifically for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And here we are with Babies in Common talking about it.
I love it. I love it.
So what is the Common Start legislation? Tell us all about it.
Sure. So it's legislation that has just been proposed in Massachusetts this year in 2021, and it would really bring us one step closer to universal childcare and early education. And really, there's so many reasons why, but it's really about, like when we think about K through 12 education, we all just accept that it's a public good that is funded through our taxes, and that if you want a public education, you don't have to pay for it. But our economy is really different. Our society is really different from when that was all established. And there's, now parents need care really early on if they are a working household with 2 working household members, 2 parents, or even just one. There's just really a need for care, and it's not that accessible. I think a lot of what you outlined, there's a lot of programs, but it's still not accessible for everybody. So this legislation would just move us closer to that universal childcare and early education.
Awesome.
So who's behind the creation of the legislation, and when did folks start working on it? You said this year, but who's kind of leading this charge?
Yeah, so it's a couple of years in the making. It was, I think the group of people that really wrote it first started coming together about 2 years ago, which just shows how much time it can take to really bring forth something that would be as game changing as this legislation. And so the organization that has really coordinated those efforts, they're called the Coalition for Social Justice. They're based on the South Coast out of the New Bedford area. And they have been really involved in other big legislative campaigns over the last several years, including the Fight for 15 to raise the minimum wage, the legislation for paid family and medical leave. So they really know what it takes to get engaged in really game-changing legislation. And so they started by talking with other like-minded organizations, but also really early on decided like, this would be big and we want to start talking to people who might not be on board right away to see if we can start this work together. So they went right to the business community from the beginning, who had been, opposing some of their work on paid family and medical leave and the Fight for 15. So they built these relationships and were like, okay, let's start with these folks this time around and see what it takes. And they also worked with labor and, faith-based organizations and other nonprofits that were, really focused on social change in this kind of way. And they met over the course of 2 years and just slowly went about growing the coalition and bringing in the people that would really need to figure out how to write this legislation in a way that would work for Massachusetts and would be attractive to voters and constituents and parents, as well as educators. So it's been a couple of years in the making.
Sounds like the right way to go about it, but man, it's crazy how long it takes, right?
Yes.
So are there other states that already have this, or is this like some other things that Massachusetts has done going to be groundbreaking in our state, in the country, because we're doing it here?
Yeah, so it's definitely, I don't believe, to my knowledge, that there's any other state that has already done this. This is one of those things that's been kind of growing, I think, in the public conscience over the last couple of years. And I know New Mexico just passed like a constitutional amendment that said that early education was a right.
Wow.
That had to be provided for. And so that just happened a couple weeks ago. So I know that's really big. I know Rhode Island is also has legislation that they're trying to pass that would create universal access. I'm sure there are others as well. I think Washington State just passed something that would make it more affordable, not quite to the universal point yet, but yeah, it's something, it's just becoming so obvious that it's needed.
It's been needed for a
Especially
long time.
in our state. I've heard, correct me if I'm wrong, that Massachusetts has some of the highest childcare costs and cost of living in the country. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I want to say we're like number 3 in the country in terms of most expensive cost of childcare and early education.
So I know in other countries, especially in Germany, where I have friends who've told me about this because they have kids where they got to experience this themselves, they have childcare funded in whole or in part already, even for newborns through kindergarten before they start public school. So are there other countries you know of who have been doing this for years? I would assume Sweden is one of them, but I don't know. What do you know?
Yeah, I would say my assumptions would be the same, that there are probably multiple European countries that fund this, like you said, I think either partially or fully. And the United States funds it partially, but to a very small group of people that are at the lowest income. And this idea would be to just really expand that. And I think, a lot of European countries think of these sort of social goods a lot more broadly than the United States has, historically. And I personally think, it would be great for our society to move more in that direction of having more, more things that people really truly need to be thought of as public goods. And I think, childcare and early education is one of them. And when I think about my own experience as a mom, I think of my husband and I as middle income. We had our child, we both had been working full time when we had our first child. And I thought we had, good jobs. And then I looked at the cost of childcare and was like, what? Like, how am I supposed to, how do people pay for this? How does that happen?
Especially
like,
if you have a second child. Once you have a second
Yeah.
child, it for many people, it makes it like not useful to work financially.
It was crazy, right? And we had our second one very shortly after our first. So I did have 2 babies, pretty much a baby and a toddler in full-time I needed full-time childcare. I couldn't afford full-time childcare. So I and luckily for me, I had a flexible employer. So I would work one day a week at home. And then I got my mom to help out one day a week, I had to piece it together because I couldn't actually afford it. And that was, and we're way over the threshold for qualifying for assistance. So you just think of those families that, we're maybe even in a lower income bracket than my husband and I, and you don't qualify for assistance, but you can't afford anything. So then you piece it together with whatever network you have, which is, not so ideal for the child, also not ideal for the parent, because if any piece of that ever falls through,
Exactly.
then what do you do? That's how it plays out, that the people that are really in the lower incomes and middle incomes, it just makes it a really hard to manage situation. And that often falls to women. So it really affects equity for women in the workforce and just women in society. And it often really affects communities of color intensely as well. And so then that further impacts issues of equity. It all gets pushed down to the kid and their experience and what they have access to, and then what?
Absolutely. I know many friends that have, myself included, my sister included, that have had to piece together, working from home / your neighbor / a childcare site or an in-home daycare to try to make it work, dropping down to part-time or taking on night shift. And, and it's a dance. It's not a fun dance because like you said, if one of those pieces of the puzzle falls through, and let's be honest, that mental load of organizing all of that and maintaining that schedule and those relationships and those who picks up who where and who needs what when, and that all falls on usually the woman in the family. I mean, let's be honest. And there's been a lot of research on that. I'm not just editorializing. There's also been a lot of information out there about how this pandemic and not having childcare has disproportionately affected women in communities of color, right? So this legislation I know that it wasn't started because of the pandemic. The wheels were turning before that, but I just feel like it highlights even more the important need for something like this. So I have a question as far as I don't know if the logistics of this have already been hammered out, but how do they determine, who pays what as far as, getting, when this legislation is passed?
Sure. So if this legislation were to pass, there would be this 5-year rollout plan so that, the most marginalized would be sort of included first as it rolled out. But the idea is that when it's fully implemented, that no family would pay more than 7% of their income towards childcare. And so I did that when I saw that, I was like, okay, what does that mean? Because I did the math on that for my family, and it definitely was less than what I was paying for even one child in full-time care,
right,
based on, our middle income salary. So I was like, okay, that really makes sense. If it all of a sudden makes me feel like, okay, that's doable, then I think it would be more doable for others. And I think it also would make it so that any income at 50%, any family with an income at 50% of the state median income, it would be 100% free. And so that, I think, is about, as state median income, I think, is in the 60,000s for a family of 4. So if you were like 30 something thousand for a family of 4, it would be fully free, no parent fees or anything of that nature. Right now, even for the families that have a subsidy for their child, they still are paying a parent fee on top of that. And so that even that fee, which is only a fraction of the cost of the care, can still be a burden for a family. So it's really trying to work to make sure that it's fully free for the people that need it to be free, and that it's affordable for those of us over that income threshold.
And so the businesses that were approached, as well as anybody else, like, what are the negatives to this? Like, what are people saying as the negatives besides who's going to pay for it?
Yeah, I was going to say, pretty much the only question is is who's going to pay for it? That's the biggest question. And then there's also a question of, and this sometimes comes from the childcare, either the childcare center, or if it's an independent like in-home daycare provider, they're like, well, is this good for my business model? Or maybe I don't want to work with, maybe I don't want the government in my business. There's some of those feelings as well. And the answer to all of those is like, if you don't want to participate in this program, you wouldn't have to. If you wanted to run a fully private in-home daycare where you weren't accepting any government funds and you wanted to just have families pay 100% out of pocket, then you could do that.
So the program, the legislation, the way it's written is that not the healthcare, I'm so used to saying healthcare provider, the childcare provider would actually get paid by the government versus the parents.
Yes,
having it be reimbursed or anything, because the parents would not have to pay anything up front. So then I think the worry, which happens with healthcare providers also, is that what is the rate going to be?
Yes.
Right. And are they going to then lose money? So that, and then that can still go back to then quality. So are people who are taking their child to one of these programs that is paid for by the state, are they going to be perceived as lesser quality? Right. But that being said, there are already places that are not being subsidized by the state that are perceived as lesser quality. So that problem is going to be the same.
Exactly. And what this will really do, like one of the first pieces that's written into the legislation is that the State Department of Early Education and Care, the first thing they would have to do is really do a thorough assessment of what is the true cost of quality care. Right. So the subsidy rates that providers are paid right now, if they're serving a family with one of those subsidies or vouchers, is not the true cost of care, right? They're really bearing that burden. And so taking into true cost, it does say it has to take into account all operational factors. So paying livable wages, providing health insurance, really all the operational pieces, not just like, what does it take to like feed this child for the day while they're here? Not just that, but really, what does it take to run the business? And so this legislation puts it on the Department of Early Education and Care to really figure out, okay, what is that amount of money really and truly? And then it would provide that funding in what the legislation is calling bedrock funding, so that it would be based on the capacity that each either center or home daycare provider had. So an in-home program that's licensed for 6 children, they would receive bedrock funding based on whatever that quality of care is for 6 children, even if they only had 4 enrolled or 5 enrolled. And then for a center, the same thing. If they're licensed for 30, 50, whatever it is, they would receive that bedrock funding that's based on what they're licensed to take care of, which would also help with, if you run a program and, you're losing several kids that are going into school or families moving, you have to fill that slot, and you have to be really, thinking about that in terms of your business model. And this would kind of help to not make it feel like it was a crisis every time, a child aged out of your care or moved or changed programs. So it would provide that bedrock funding. And then the rest would be either filled by parent fees or those subsidy payments.
There's a program I know of, which I'll leave unnamed because I don't know what they're up to these days. And they were lovely, but I happened to, through some other work I was doing many, many years ago, I got to have a tour of a relatively large center that was subsidized, and everybody that went there almost everybody, the way they put it, almost everybody that went to this place, and there were, I think, a couple hundred kids who were preschool and younger, and most of them were subsidized by the state, so for very low income. And one of the things I remember them talking about is how much pressure they had for all the fundraising efforts they had to do to make up for the money that they couldn't get from all those subsidies. And so that's a huge challenge too, because you're working with a lower income community, and oftentimes fundraising was going to have to come out of richer communities where they can afford to donate money, and you're constantly like nurturing those, and that's a lot of time away from programming you could have spent on the kids. you know, or overseeing the program or overseeing the teachers or coming up with using that money for some other thing that the children would benefit from. So it sounds like this is
Exactly.
going to be a benefit for the actual schools and teachers, programs, etc., which would be helpful. Although with COVID, I've heard from some parents that they're having a harder time because some childcare centers, I don't know about big centers, but definitely childcare home centers, home daycares, whatever they call them. Yeah, they have shut down
Mm,
Mhm.
because
Yeah,
of all
there's
the
been a
COVID
huge
regulations.
amount. Yeah, there's been a huge amount of closures for both centers, and the home-based
Mm,
programs have shut down because of just either the difficulty, or some programs have like lost all their kids. Their kids are all at home with parents now, or parents didn't feel
mm,
safe sending them back, or
right.
found other arrangements, or um yeah, it's been really hard on the industry as a whole. And then those that, you know, have been able to continue functioning had to lower their enrollments in some cases because of the, you know, the restrictions. They couldn't necessarily
right.
accommodate as many, or their staff, they lost staff. So there's been a huge challenge, I think, on the industry just in COVID, you know, in addition to what was already, I think, a business model that just didn't work anymore.
So my question is, and I know it sounds like the obvious answer is going to be parents need to work, but when you say that childcare, you know, there's an option to consider childcare and universal childcare as a public good. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Like, why do we need expanded access to childcare and early education? Why would somebody who doesn't have kids or whose kids are grown, why should they vote for something like this if it's not going to, you know, directly impact them? What's a public? Why is it a public good?
Right. So I think that's a great question. And it's one of those things where this would raise all boats, right? So if all children had access to care and quality care and consistent care and early education that prepared them for school and for life and just gave them a nurturing start to their lives, that just creates better humans, right? And this whole world can really benefit from having better humans overall. And then also, when, you know, some people look at things maybe more from an economic standpoint. So, you know, businesses, I think, need to ask the question of like, well, what's in this for us? And it's from that perspective, if an employer can know that all its employees have access to the childcare that they need to be the employee that they want to be, and that the business or whatever wants them to be, like, that's a huge component for parents, which, you know, people say creates them better workers and better, you know, better outcomes for that company or entity. So there's that. And then children who have, there's so much research on, and you all probably actually know it so much more than I do, just in terms of what happens in a child's life between, you know, 0 and 5 years, 0 and 7 years, has such an impact on them for the rest of their lives, just in their ability to learn and grow and, you know, grow up to be a human that can really contribute to society in whatever ways. And so I think this just really ensures that there's enough stability for all children, right? And it's not just for children whose parents can afford it, but it would be, you know, a start for all children to be in safe, quality, nurturing care and educational environments.
I think even for people who aren't working, this could be good. Because even if, you know, say you're a new parent and you're having a rough day or you don't feel well, you could have a childcare center or a home daycare that had an extra slot that you were sort of like on the list for occasional use, and different childcare centers and home daycares could have those opportunities to say, oh, well, we have somebody out today, and ring, ring, ring. Hey, we've got some time today. Did you want to run some errands or take some time for yourself
Mhm.
today? And that would open up something that we just have never really seen.
So I
Mhm.
I I assumed that this was only for working parents. Is that not true? This is kind of blowing my mind. This would be universal for like any citizen in Massachusetts to send their kids as long as they qualify by age.
I mean, I think that's a great question. I would assume yes, because even right now, if you weren't working, but you wanted to enroll your child in a part-time, if you found
You had money,
a
you could do it.
center,
Yeah.
if you had money, you could do it.
Right.
You could send your child for care, even if you were not, working, even though, like, let's be honest, as women, we're all working all the
Oh
time.
yeah, no, it's definitely not. My husband and I joke like, I get to go to work today. No, I get to go to work today because honestly, in this pandemic with 3 little kids under the age of, 9, being at work with grown-ups is less work than being
Yeah, it's
home
like,
Yeah.
and running a
yeah.
household with the
Yeah.
3 kids at homeschool,
Yeah.
Oh,
remote school,
absolutely.
whatever.
I mean, even pre-pandemic, when my kids were both little, Monday morning, like my Monday morning, I think was how other people felt on Friday afternoons. Like I would go to work on Monday morning and was like, this is amazing.
Sipping the coffee at the desk. Yeah.
I'm gonna have a cup of coffee. I'm gonna converse with some grown-ups.
And you
This
get to,
is
the biggest thing about
awesome.
working is that you get to pee whenever you want
And
without people
alone.
watching you. Yes.
And alone.
Privacy. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. So yeah, I think this could be the start, right? To normalizing having additional care for your kids beyond just yourself, maybe like bringing back the whole concept of the village a little bit more that it takes to raise our babies, and having moms and parents feel a little bit less alone. I had never thought of it in that way, but now I really like that angle.
We'll have to make sure that that's, well, I mean, you don't have to currently prove you're working to have daycare, like you said.
No, but you're
So
paying for it yourself.
you're paying for it,
so
right.
it doesn't
So,
matter. I mean,
yeah,
you
well,
can
we'll
buy
have
it. You can
to,
pay
we'll
for
have
a
to,
nanny or a housekeeper
so Liz,
too, if
can you
can
get back
afford
to
it.
us about this?
Yeah, I'd like
So that we can
I'm
be
gonna
sure
look
that
into
the
this.
legislation allows for that, because we just need to make sure. what
Yeah,
we're
I'm
thinking about.
curious.
Yeah.
So if our listeners want to help with this effort, what do you recommend they do? Should they be contacting legislators? Is there a bill number they should reference? And any tips on that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So a great place to start is the website commonstartma.org. Nice and easy, and it's a very accessible website with really easy to find information. If you want to read more about it, there's a take action tab where you can go right into there. You can join a regional chapter. So the way the campaign is really working is by having regional chapters around the state of Massachusetts. I coordinate the Central Massachusetts chapter, and what that means is I have a monthly meeting where I'm making sure that I'm conveying, what our next steps are as a campaign, and bringing updates and fielding questions and things like that, and just kind of building knowledge and understanding, as well as kind of like energy around what needs to happen. For folks that already know who their legislator is and they want to find out if their legislator supports it and let them know, I say absolutely reach out. We're calling it the Common Start legislation, and I'm just scrolling quickly for a bill number. I'm forgetting off the top of my head what it is.
So this will be something that legislators vote on, not something that would be a referendum or something.
Right. At this point, it's not. Right now, the idea is that it's something for the legislature to vote on. It was just filed, and it'll go through a process of like committee hearings and input. There has been a lot of support thus far. One of the processes in an effort like this is when you file the legislation, so you propose it to the legislature, and then legislators can co-sponsor it, meaning that they are showing some support. And we got a majority to co-sponsor it in both the House of Representatives in Massachusetts and the state Senate. So yeah, a ton of interest around this. I think it's just one of those issues that touches people on so many sides. So there's been a lot of interest. So the bill number is HD 1960, and that's for the House of Representatives side, and then the Senate side is SD 1307 on the state Senate side.
Cool.
Excellent.
I know, even if taxes go up, people are always so worried about taxes. And yes, it's not technically free. Our taxes are paying for it. But in societies where I have visited or I have lived in, it is amazing what quality of life one can have if your taxes are divided amongst things that we're all getting benefit from.
Mhm.
So I certainly hope that that concept will be on top of people's minds as they're thinking about this.
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
looking forward to learning more about it. I think this podcast has raised more questions for me to research now. So I'm going to be doing that. So thank you for coming on our show. This has been really interesting conversation. Something I
Yeah.
never thought about.
Right? I know. I love it. We have such cool people that are
We do have
involved in
cool
our
people.
lives. So thank you, Liz, for reaching out and talking to me about it because I was like, this sounds fascinating.
Yeah,
All right.
absolutely.
So yeah, awesome. So we hope our listeners will visit your website, your organization's website. It's www.seiueducation.org to learn more about the work it's doing. And we hope you'll keep us updated on the progress of the legislation, because if something new happens, we can always post that on our social media too. So let us know. Yeah. So thanks.
Yeah. And we hope you all have enjoyed today's show. We hope you'll tune in again. Remember, Babies in Common is a community for you. After all, we all have
Babies in common.
Thanks again, Liz.
Thanks for having me.